Welcome, everyone. It's just 4 o'clock, so I'll give everyone a minute or two to join. So get started shortly. Okay, welcome everyone to our webinar on cracking the code with the science of reading. My name is Danielle D'Amico, and I'm the Director of Learning Science at Amplify. And I just want to say thank you so much for attending. I know everyone has very busy and very atypical schedules these days. So we really appreciate you taking the time to join us and be a part of this webinar today. Just to give you a little bit of background, I'm on the research and measurement team within Amplify. So I'm part of the team that does a lot of the data analysis, background research, and all of those things on the products that we build and provide to our users. My background is in school psychology and special education, and I've been really focused on early literacy throughout my training and career. So hopefully we can have a really great discussion or at least chat about early literacy and cracking the code today. So just some housekeeping things. The webinar is being recorded and the recording will be emailed to everyone who registered. If you are having technical difficulties, let us know in the questions panel. We also recommend that sometimes the easiest way to solve any technical difficulties is to restart Zoom. And we'll be answering questions at the end of today's webinar. So if you could send the questions into the panel at any time through the Q&A, but I won't be taking a look at those until the very end. All right, so these are some of the questions we're going to answer today and topics we'll discuss. I'm sure many of you have participated or heard different podcasts and webinars and things that Amplify has put together. And many of them talk about the simple view of reading, and today's will be no exception. So we'll talk about the simple view of reading. We'll talk about how the brain learns to read, why foundational skills instruction is so important, what phonological awareness and phonics are, and what effective and foundational skills instruction looks like. And we recognize that there is lots of information about early literacy and foundational skills instruction. So we hope today is a little bit different than some of the other resources you've seen or been provided, in that we get into a lot of the background on how students learn to read. And we'll also be visiting one of our supplemental digital literacy programs to illustrate the foundational skills instruction, and it's a program that's available for lots of our users widely right now, and I'll give more information about that at the end. All right, like I said, we're going to start with the simple view of reading. But as we do that, I wanted to just jump in and start with a little activity. So I'd like you to take a minute and read this passage to yourself. So you probably got through at least 2/3 of it or so. But ask yourselves, what is this passage about? Did you understand the passage at all? And what if I did this? And now I give you the title of that passage. That might change the way you were thinking about what you read, and help your understanding of the passage. So this sort of sets us up to talk about the simple view of reading. We were able to decode the words. The text wasn't very hard, there weren't too many challenging words in there, but we also had to put it together with some of our background knowledge, our understanding of the context, our understanding of the language in the context of what the title of this passage was. So it's really illustrating those two pieces of the simple view of reading. So what the simple view of reading says is that language comprehension and word reading are required in order for us to be proficient readers. We know that we need to be able to recognize words and decode them, but that isn't sufficient for being able to really read for meaning and understand text as we're reading it. We also need to have that language comprehension piece in place as well. So the simple view of reading does a really great job of helping us understand what is actually a really complex process, which is reading. But let's break it down a little further and take a look at this rope that illustrates these two pieces of the simple view reading and how we can break that down even further. So this is an image that was adapted from Scarborough. You may have heard the term the Scarborough braid, but this really illustrates those two sides of the simple view of reading and all of the pieces that go into it. So on the language comprehension side, we need to have background knowledge, we need to understand vocabulary, we need to be able to comprehend sentences and understand the structure of sentences. We need to make connections between ideas, and we need to build those mental models or get the gist of the text that we're reading. On the word recognition side, we need to understand that words are made up of sounds, we need to be able to map sounds to letters, and we need to be able to automatically decode words to be able to read. So let's take a look at some examples. So we talked about these a little bit, but just digging in some more. We have background knowledge, vocabulary breadth and depth. We have to extract ideas from sentences, make connections, build our model, and understand sounds, letters, and words, and be able to decode with automaticity. So let's do a little game. So while you're there, I'm going to ask you a question and think to yourself, which strand of the braid does this question map onto? So the first one is, what are the sounds in ship? And if you said sounds, kind of a giveaway on that one, you'd be correct. This is phonemic awareness, or the understanding that spoken words are made up of sounds. Here's another one. Why is this funny? I've had a wonderful evening, but this wasn't it. That one maps onto our sentences strand. We need to understand that what this stands for, and it's standing in place of a wonderful evening. We need to understand it. We need to figure out syntax and how that impacts meaning. How about the next one? Let's see. Say as many words as you can that mean the same as big. That would be a great vocabulary one. We have to know a range of word meanings, words that have similar meanings and are connected to each other. And let's do one more. How could heavy snowfall lead to a flood? That would be our connections. So we need to make connections between ideas across sentences. So that was just a little fun to get us geared up and thinking about all of the different aspects and pieces that go into being able to successfully read. And those items are included in the slide for your future fun and reference. So this one is just to say the simple view of reading, yes, it's really simple, but it describes a complex process. And it's really important for us to be thinking about really building both strands of the braid, but focusing on that decoding strand early for students, because we know students start out pretty similarly, but as soon as we start to see gaps in the achievement of our students, those gaps can get bigger and bigger. So we need to catch students as early as possible and provide them that strong foundation instruction as early as possible to prevent these gaps from widening. So we're really going to focus on that foundational skills side of the braid and cracking the code for our students. So to do that, we wanted to start by giving some background on how the brain learns to read, to really, illustrate how critical our foundational skills instruction is for students. So here's an image of a brain. This is the, a side view of your brain. The red part shows where there's activity. So this is where millions of neurons are firing. So next, it's probably hard to see, but this is a time-lapse sequence starting at the left, and it shows the brain of someone speaking a word. So we can see activity starts in a small spot, roughly in the middle of the left side, and spreads downward and forward until a large chunk of the left side lights up. So again, this is for a spoken word with no print. So the part that lit up from the spoken word is the part of the brain that deals with speech. Notice that the rear of the brain is dark. It isn't involved in speech at all. So this is the area of your brain that eventually lights up with spoken word, and notice where that is. And I should say, I am not a neuroscientist, so this is just our, very brief overview of what is happening here. There are lots more details that we could dig into with an expert. The next sequence of images is a time lapse of the same brain reading a word instead of speaking it. So this is reading instead of speaking. Notice this time, activity starts at the back of the brain, which is the visual area. If this were the brain of someone who couldn't read, this is where the signal would end. So written words would trigger that visual activation of that part of the brain. But this is the brain of a reader, and the activity spreads from the back of the brain along the bottom surface and into the whole middle area. And the middle area, remember, is what is responsible for speech. So what you see here is a written word actually triggering speech. And this happens whether you say the word out loud or not. So just when you're reading a word, a reader will trigger that, both the visual area and the speech area. So we are pre-wired to understand language, but decoding is what a lot of people might say is unnatural. We actually, as humans, had to invent it. And to invent that, basically what we needed to do was to connect the visual part of the brain to the auditory part of the brain. So we're basically rewiring our brains as we're learning to read. Language was invented, written language was invented much later in development. So we aren't born with that ability to actually have those connections between the visual and the auditory area. So between the visual zone at the back of the brain, which is in green there, and the spoken language zone in the purple and white, is the visual word form area, that middle box there in green. This is where something truly miraculous is happening. So like we said, everyone is born with the language part of the brain, the speech and the meaning parts in purple and white there, and everyone is born with the visual part of the brain, that green box all the way to the right. But no one is born with the connections between those areas. Those are the connections that enable reading. We have to build the visual word form area in the brain, one connection at a time. So just to sum up, being able to read with understanding requires both text decoding and language comprehension. And we're focused on that text decoding piece today. But our brains are not pre-wired to decode. A new set of connections between vision and speech has to be painstakingly constructed in every reader. So let's take a look now at what this means for instruction. What we know is the most efficient way to build this system and to build the connections between vision and speech is to work at the sound and letter level and to build those connections. And because it would take so much more time for us to have to memorize every single word as a word. These explicit connections between letters and sounds need to be made, and we need to give students lots of opportunities to practice making those connections. So let's dig in on some instructional pieces. So we'll talk about the first step in the process, the idea that words are made up of sounds and the ability to hear and manipulate the sounds in words. So that's phonological awareness. And to become a strong reader, we have to have phonological awareness. So I want you to take a minute and put yourself back into a place where you're an early reader, you're just learning some early literacy skills, and I want you to count the phonemes in the word you hear. And hopefully you'll be able to hear it.
再见
I'll play that one for you again.
再见
So think to yourself, how many phonemes does that word have? And we'll do one more.
Gracias. Gracias.
So I will tell you that the first word was goodbye in Mandarin, and it has 6 phonemes. And the second word was thank you in Spanish, and it has 7 phonemes. But it is not because I was able to count them, it was because I looked it up. And we just wanted to illustrate how challenging it is to hear the different parts of the word as if you aren't familiar with the language, and as you're first being exposed to words and sounds. So let's define some terms. A lot of times people use these terms interchangeably, but they do mean something slightly different. Phonological awareness is the understanding that words are made up of sounds and the ability to hear, identify, and manipulate those sounds. And phonemic awareness is the ability to hear, identify, and manipulate the individual sounds and phonemes. And the understanding that the phonemes in words, and the understanding that spoken words are made up of sounds. So they're very similar. Phonemic awareness is at that smallest unit, the phoneme, whereas phonological awareness can happen at higher levels, and we'll look at that. So phonological awareness is really that umbrella term for sound awareness, that you can have phonological awareness at the word level, the ability to isolate individual words from the speech flow, the syllable level, the ability to blend and segment chunks within words, the onset rhyme level, the ability to manipulate intrasyllabic units. An example of onset rhyme would be if the word is cat, the onset is k and the rhyme is at. And then the phoneme level, the ability to manipulate the individual sounds in words. So phonological awareness is that umbrella term, and the phoneme level is that smallest unit of sound in a word. So if the word is cat, the phonemes would be k, a, and t. There are also different types of phonemic awareness. and different ways that students need to show their phonemic awareness. So identifying and matching initial sounds in words, and then moving to final and middle sounds. So things like which picture begins with s, find another that begins with segmenting and producing initial, then final, and middle sounds. So moving beyond just matching and actually being able to segment that on your own. What sound does rat start with? Say the last sound in tack. Blending phonemes into words, knowing that if I say s, a, t, the whole word is set. Being able to segment words in phonemes. Man segments to a, and being able to manipulate phonemes in words. At s to the end of cap to get caps, and so on. And what research has shown and what we're typically targeting for the end of first grade is that students are able to segment words in phonemes. So there are 44 phonemes in the English language. So 44 different sounds that we have to be able to hear and identify and manipulate. And hold this thought for a little bit until when we come to decoding as well. So these are just, there's so much research out there on the importance of phonological awareness. So we just wanted to give some snippets of the research base and what we know about phonological awareness. It's the best predictor of reading difficulty in kindergarten through third grade and even beyond. So it's a really, really strong predictor of overall reading success for the long term. It's the primary difference between good and poor beginning readers. Really importantly, it's something that makes a difference when we teach it. So it isn't just something that's important to identify in students and know where they are. It's really important to teach it and give students lots of practice. And it's necessary for strong beginning reading skills, including decoding and word recognition. We have to be able to hear the sounds in words and manipulate them if we're going to successfully decode and recognize words. So this is just a snapshot of some of the literature. Note the dates on this. We've known this for quite some time. So it's really, really well established how important phonological awareness is. All right, I'm going to share an example. As I mentioned, Amplify has a supplemental digital reading program called Amplify Reading. And here's an example of a phonological awareness game within the program. And I challenge you to think about what level of phonological awareness this game is teaching in this particular item. This is actually onboarding for the game. So this is where the students will see this level for the first time. So we're explaining the task.
These are sound bots. Words are made up of sounds, and these sound bots can only say the smallest parts of the word. Help find the word they want to say together. Tap this bot to hear its sound. Great. Now tap to hear the next bot. Great. Now tap to hear the next bot. Sounds like they are trying to say,
man,
drag this tile to them.
man. Man.
Find the word the sound bots want to say together.
Shin.
Oops. Let's try again.
Fan.
That's not quite right. Words are made up of sounds. Listen to the sound bots. These sounds blend together to make a word.
Fish. Fish.
Move the slider.
All right, so that was, like I said, the introduction to the skill of what level of phonological awareness? Yes, it was at the phonemic level. So what you saw was a game that gives students an opportunity to practice their phonemic awareness skills And what you saw was not the introduction to the skill, an opportunity for the student to practice, and the scaffold that comes into place when a student is struggling or doesn't understand the concept. So the student answered incorrectly twice, so then students were given an opportunity to use the slider and to move the sounds closer and closer together so that they could see how to really blend the sounds into words. All right.
Sure.
Okay, so that's our quick trip through phonological awareness. So now let's take a look at phonics. Wanted to find some terms here too, because there are lots of terms that are used to describe the skills related to phonics. So sometimes you'll hear the term the alphabetic principle, and this means the letters, that knowing that letters represent sounds, and phonics is an understanding of the alphabetic principle and the ability to apply this knowledge to decode unfamiliar words. So basically it comes down to, I need to know the sounds of letters or combinations of letters, and I need to be able to blend those sounds into words. And I'm of course working toward automaticity. I don't want to always be blending. I want to have automatic recognition because I've built those connections between letters and sounds so strongly. This is just a little origin of the symbol for A, and the sound for A. And now, again, I want you to transport yourself back into being a beginning reader and start to look at how these different symbols map onto sounds and what it's like to try to blend those sounds into words for the first time. So think to yourself, what is this word? And there's a little trick here. In this particular writing and language system, we work from right to left. So let's try another example in our Phoenician writing system. Give you a bit to work on that. Did everyone get it? Kit ran and hid, I believe. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. So just illustrating, it can be a pretty laborious process at first when we don't have those sound symbol connections solidly in place. So it's really important to provide that explicit instruction and make those connections for students and give them lots of opportunities to practice applying those connections, first in isolation, then in words, and then in reading connected text. Let's see. Okay, so again, just wanted to show, why is decoding so important? Here's another really great illustration of how all of this comes together. Early on, when we're really young and first learning to read, decoding and word recognition are really highly correlated. This relationship gets a little weaker over time, but it's really, really critical early on. Students have to be strong decoders in order to comprehend what they're reading. And good word reading is if students are struggling with word reading, they're probably not comprehending. Like I said, the relationship isn't as strong as time goes on. Language becomes more complex. The text we're reading becomes more complex. But in the beginning, this is really, really critical. And research has really well established the importance of word recognition. So just want to illustrate, remember I said when we were talking about phonological awareness and there were 44 phonemes, to hold that thought for a minute, but just want to illustrate how English makes all of this even a little bit more complicated than it needs to be, or than it could be. English is one of those languages that is not very transparent, meaning there are many sounds and there are many ways to write those sounds. There are many symbols that stand for the same sound, and there are many symbols that stand for multiple sounds. To take a look at this sentence, the drought has been rough on my cough, though I ought to get through it. So I'm sure you noticed that O-U-G-H appears multiple times in this sentence, and O-U-G-H is pronounced differently every time that it appears. So there are 6 different sounds that the combination O-U-G-H can make. And O-U-G-H isn't the only example of that in English. So learning to read in English is very challenging. We have lots of sound symbol correspondences that we need to learn, and they aren't always the same. In other languages like Spanish and Finnish that are much more transparent, students actually learn to decode much earlier because there are fewer phonemes and there is a more direct correspondence between the sounds and the visual representation of those sounds. Other complicated thing about English is we have lots of words where the rules just seem to go out the window. I, yacht, choir. So there's lots of irregular spellings in these words. There are some clues though. You can start to try to sound some of these out and get somewhere, but you have to start recognizing some words by sight over time. But importantly, you really have to focus on those connections and use what you know about sound and symbol relationships to start to decode some of these wacky words. I don't imagine that you can read all of what is on this slide, but this is an illustration of all of the different skills that students need to learn in order to become successful decoders. So at the bottom of this subway map, we like to call it, is decoding really simple words like CBC words, cat, bat, and then moving up through the continuum. In the middle, we have things like decoding regularly spelled one-syllable words with variant vowel combinations, and that's where our O-U-G-H appears. And then all the way at the top, being able to read text with purpose and understanding, putting all of those decoding skills together. So lots of things that students need to learn along the way that really need to be taught explicitly and systematically in order to build those connections, thinking back to our images of the brain between the visual area and the auditory area. And this is just another description of that, or how important it is, not just the explicit instruction part, but the practicing. So practicing decoding doesn't mean flipping through beautiful books or listening to someone else read. Expert pianists and tennis players don't become expert by watching someone else play. They practice deliberately, focusing on their weakest skills and working hard to improve them. So it's the instruction and practice that is so key. Some of the images that you've been seeing, the brain images and this image, are coming from Amplify's Learning to Read primers. And we have those available for review that have lots of this information about how students learn to read and the important skills and some of the history of all of this. So a great resource that we can provide for you. Okay, so I wanted to share a phonics game in Amplify Reading. This is a game that is introducing letter-sound correspondence. I just want to point out a few features before I start. You'll see it will become more clear when I hit play, but each of these toasts has a letter on it, and each letter comes with an image that serves as a mnemonic device to help students remember the sounds. So M always has a mouth on it. The T has a necktie. O for octopus, and A has an apple. So we embed those in initial instruction only, just to give students an example to tie the sound to. The other feature I want to show you is you can see the screen here with the mouth animation. So lots of research has shown that showing students how to form the sounds is really beneficial. So in our initial instruction of individual sounds, we have these images available for students, or these videos available for students. So I'll go ahead and play this.
These toasts have letters on them. This letter makes the sound, like in
Mouth.
now you say it. This letter makes the sound, like in
Apple.
now you say it. This letter makes the sound, like in
Tie.
now you say it. This letter makes the sound, like in
Octopus.
now you say it. These goblins are picky eaters. Feed the goblin the toast that makes the sound it says. Tap the mouth icon to see how the sound is made. Looks like the goblin wants. Drag this toast to the goblin.
Okay, so that is our Picky Goblins game. So that was the introduction to the letters, and you notice we also ask students to say the letters to get that practice, and we go through and introduce all the letters in this way in different levels of the game and in different points of the program, following a really clear and research-based scope and sequence for introducing the individual letter sounds, and then we get into teaching common letter combinations as well. Want to show you another game that is called Word City. And in this game, students are building words. So you'll notice they have to use their phonological awareness skills to hear the sounds in words, and then they're manipulating those sounds in words. So they need to use their phonological awareness skills and their mappings of the sounds to the letters to build words.
Drag the letter tile to make the word.
At.
Change
At.
to.
Mat.
Use this tile to remove letters from the word. Change
Mat.
to.
At.
All right, so that's another one of our phonics games. So we've talked about phonological awareness and phonics, so our really critical foundational skills. So now we just want to give you some more information about Amplify Reading and how it's used within an effective literacy system to support the foundational skills development of students. So again, if you've attended any other Amplify webinars, we like to talk about putting a full comprehensive system of literacy instruction in place that's driven by data and really has a full continuum of instructional supports available for students. So we have our core instruction that's meeting the needs of most of our learners, that all students are participating in and getting really strong research-based and explicit instruction in phonological awareness and phonics. We have our differentiated instruction and practice, and we have our intervention. So Amplify Reading really provides really strong differentiated instruction and practice for students. It's a program that students can be placed in based on data on their starting skills. So we start them in the program in a place that matches what they need. And then from there, the program adapts to build skills and personalize the journey for the students as they're learning to read. So students start in a strong spot that's aligned to their skills, and then from there, the program responds and adapts based on how they do within the games. So what are key features of small group instruction and personalized practice? And we'll talk about how Amplify Reading incorporates these key features. So like we talked about, because building these connections between sounds and letters is so important, making sure there's direct and explicit instruction is really important as well. It's also really critical that we teach skills in a systematic and sequential order. We want students to learn easy skills before hard skills and to learn prerequisite skills before other skills so that we're really helping them build towards automaticity over time. It's also really important to give students immediate feedback. We don't want them to be practicing incorrectly. We want them to be accurate and successful and to learn without making too many mistakes along the way. We want to make sure we're teaching to mastery. So we want students to demonstrate success and experience success and really solidify the learning for students. And good programs are also really aligned to the specific needs of students. So we'll talk a little bit more about the instruction Amplify Reading. As you saw, we have foundational skills games that cover phonological awareness. They cover phonics. We do some fluency building as well. And we're talking about the foundational skills side of Amplify Reading today, but the program also incorporates strong vocabulary instruction, strong comprehension instruction, and close reading instruction. And we build vocabulary and comprehension starting in kindergarten. So we're building that full profile, full set of literacy skills for students all along the way. So some of the games you see here this is one of our phonological awareness games in the top left, where the student is blending sounds into words. You saw our Goblins games. And you saw Word City. And then the game in the bottom right is a game called Curioso Crossing, and that builds automatic word recognition. And it starts by helping students work through sounding out words. And then there's an automaticity mode where students have to work to beat a timer and recognize words by sight and develop their automaticity. As we mentioned, the instruction really needs to be systematic and sequential in order to be successful for students and to help them build their skills in these areas. So that's what Amplify Reading does. And you'll see an example of this on the right. We teach pre-skills before the new skill or strategy is presented. So we start with easier things like matching rhyming words. Then we move into blending and thinking about phonological awareness and how we talked about how there's multiple levels of phonological awareness. We always start at the syllable level and move to the onset and rhyme and then phoneme level. And then we do segmenting in that way as well and provide lots of practice and review along the way. On the decoding side, we teach letter sounds in isolation, and then students move right from there into reading words with those sounds, and then from there they get right into some decodable text and short sentence reading that has words with the letter sounds that they just learned. So it's this very systematic and carefully sequenced approach to providing instruction for students. As we mentioned, we want the instruction to be really direct and explicit. We want to be totally clear with students and leave nothing to chance and explain all of the rules and sounds that we can up front. You saw a little bit of that in the games that I showed, but here's another example where we really clearly explain the silent E at the end of words. So the letter E has magical powers when it comes at the end of a word. The magic E makes the vowel sound in the word long. Listen, the word is dim, and when you add the magic E at the end, this word becomes dime. Now you try make the word dime, and then students are given lots and lots of opportunities to build words that require or don't require the silent E, so they can practice hearing and building and reading words with both the short and long sounds. As we mentioned, immediate feedback is really important. You saw an example of this in the game that I showed earlier, where we have feedback that's confirms for a student when they answer correctly. We also let the student know when they answer incorrectly, but we really try to do this in a really positive and growth forward thinking kind of way. Nothing is really negative or punitive at all. So we will tell students that they need to try again or tell them it's not quite right, and then we provide some supports to help them get to the correct answer. So that was an example that you saw earlier, students answering correctly, and then we help them build their skills by showing them how to blend sounds into words. And this is we do things like this throughout the program, where if students are getting answers incorrectly, we put them into different practice modes or give them fewer options to choose from to help scaffold the work. It's also really important, as we said, to give students lots of opportunities to respond and ensure that they're truly mastering and understand the content. So within the game, students have to meet a certain criteria for them to move to the next level. And if they don't meet those criteria, the game will go away for a little while. Students can build skills around that are similar to that skill, and then the game will come back later. And this is all shown to teachers in our reporting, so teachers can always see the different games and skills the student is working on and the different content within those games that the student is working on within this top part of the report here, which is what is the student doing right now? And in the bottom of the report, we show the teachers where the student has been working along the way, and the teacher can see the types of skills and content the student has completed successfully and the types of skills and content where the student has been experiencing some trouble spots. And in addition to telling students or teachers where students are experiencing trouble spots, we provide some additional instructional resources that teachers can use to provide some direct instruction. The program builds in a lot of supports for struggling readers and English learners. We have reveal words, or you'll see that's what you see in the top left. Students can click on specific words and find a definition or find images to help them understand the meaning of the word. As I mentioned before, the mouth illustrations have been found to be really effective for helping students learn to say the sounds, and especially for English learners. And we also have lots of different vocabulary games. This is an illustration of our Shades of Meaning game, where students have to order words by their meaning, and we provide lots of scaffolds and supports there, and I can show you that as well.
Each Amplify Reading game provides scaffolding to assist students who initially struggle with the skills addressed in the game. Here, I'm going to play a game that works my deep vocabulary knowledge or understanding of the relationship between words. Research suggests that poor comprehenders have difficulty with this skill. So this game, called Shades of Meaning, will help students visualize the relationships between words by ordering them according to intensity of meaning. The game is asking me to arrange these words from hot to cold. So here's the right answer. But let's say I have difficulty with this exercise. Here, the game will adapt and provide me with additional scaffolding. I would now be provided with the definitions of these words to help demonstrate the gradation of meaning between them. Let's say I make the wrong choice even with that scaffolding. The game will then provide me with a different kind of assistance. So now I'm given a visual sequence to access the meaning of these words and to understand how words are similar, yet how they differ in degree.
All right, so that was another example of some of the supports that we provide for English learners and struggling readers. And I wanted to say we don't have the data here, but we obviously take a look at the impact of this program on students' skills. And what we find is that this program really accelerates growth for all of our learners. So when we compared students who started in a similar place and played Amplify Reading versus those who didn't, we see more growth in the students who played Amplify Reading than those who didn't play Amplify Reading. And we see this pattern across different populations of students. So we see this in our English learners. They make more growth than students who are English learners and don't play the games. And we also see that same pattern in students who have been identified as needing special education services. And in some cases and in some grades, we're actually seeing Amplify Reading starting to make the gaps between special education students and their non-special education receiving peers get smaller and smaller, and the same for English learners. So really starting to see gaps closing for our students. So that is just the briefest of overviews of Amplify Reading and how it supports students and how it focuses on the foundational skills early. I think I'll take a minute to answer some questions and then wrap it up. Let's see. So one question is this program intended for general education students? And how do students with dyslexia or students with disabilities typically respond to these types of activities? So I think I touched on that a little bit just a second ago. In terms of big, large-scale data sets, we see that this program is having a major impact on our students with disabilities and our students, which we haven't pulled out students with dyslexia specifically, but they typically would be included in that group of students who receive special education services, and we see great growth for those students. The other thing is that when we created the games and thought about the type of instruction that we wanted and needed to provide to students, we really looked to the literature on what works best for struggling learners, including students with dyslexia and other reading-related disabilities. And that research is really clear that the directness and the explicitness and the feedback and the practice are all really, really key. So all of our games incorporate that approach. And our approach really aligns with recommendations from the International Dyslexia Association around providing structured literacy instruction. So we've designed the program to really meet the needs of our most struggling learners, and are seeing that it is paying off, and we're seeing strong growth for those students. Let's see, another one is, does Amplify have an assessment it gives to place the student? Is it adaptive? So Amplify is also the provider of the DIBELS 8 assessment and a text reading and comprehension assessment called M-Class. And we will use that data to place students within the Amplify Reading program. If you are not an M-Class user, we also support placement into the program with a variety of other third-party assessments that you may administer. So we could talk about which of those assessments we support. And the next part of that question was, is it adaptive? And yes, once students are placed in the program, we provide the content matched to their needs based on their initial data. And then based on their responses to those items and those games, we then determine where to go next for the student. So we might go on, depending on the performance, we might go on to our next harder skill, or we might say that the student needs to take a break from a particular skill, practice some other skills around it and come back to it, so it will adapt in that way. And I think one thing that's different about Amplify Reading than other programs is that our adaptivity and our learning progression adapts at the skill domain level. So a student can be making progress in phonics and struggling with comprehension, and so we'll continue to progress through the scope and sequence of phonics and might not progress as quickly through the comprehension portion. So it's adapting at that domain level and not not lumping all of the skills together. Let's see, looking for more questions. Another question is, how does Amplify Reading address sight words? So I think, let's see, back to this view, this game down here in the bottom right called Curioso Crossing is a word, word automaticity building game. So it starts with decodable words, and students first decode and move to reading decodable words by sight, but there are also many levels that include what we would call high frequency sight words, so they don't follow the the typical decoding rules, and are words that students really just need to practice recognizing them automatically. So there are some levels that are focused on those high frequency sight or irregular words as well. Let's see. We talked about reading and English language learners, and we're just about out of time. So I love all your questions. I didn't get to all of them, but hopefully we got to a lot of them. And we will send the slides once this is over. But I wanted to share some more information about different resources that are available from Amplify. One is the Science of Reading podcast. So our internal expert, Susan Lambert, does lots of interviews with different researchers on topics related to learning to read. So I really encourage you to listen to those podcasts. They're really, really interesting conversations with leaders in the field, and they're at a level that's really practical and easy to understand and implement from. We also have a Facebook group called Science of Reading the Community, and we invite you to join that group. And something that's really exciting, and I think we'll address a couple of the questions that came in, is that we are offering Amplify Reading in a remote learning version. So won't have all the bells and whistles that we described today, but most of them for the remainder of the school year. So there is an opportunity for educators and students to access Amplify Reading for free. Here's some of the highlights. We talked about a lot of them. It works on a variety of devices, demonstrated growth, as we talked about. It's based on the science of reading and adaptive, like we talked about, and founded in game-based learning and social emotional learning strategies to keep students engaged. And I hope I didn't hit on that so much throughout the webinar, but I hope you really saw. I think Amplify Reading is really different than a lot of programs that are out there because it is so engaging. Students really love it. That is the consistent feedback that we get, is students absolutely love to play this program. And as we saw, there are data insights for teachers to monitor progress. So we hope Amplify Reading can support you and your students throughout the remainder of this school year. We know these are unprecedented times and people need resources to help support their students. So this is where you can gain access. Like I said, we'll send the slides, so you'll have access to this link. But yes, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you had learned something or thought about something a little differently today, and we hope to hear from you soon. Thank you.